At the end of last year, during my public broadcast of my class, I made an announcement where I said that due to many different situations, now the Bodhi study group is dissolved, and I asked everyone to study and practice on their own. And ever since then, there's no longer any organized gatherings. In fact, there was never a registered organization. It had always been a voluntarily organized studying group. At the end of last year, I made it very clear, telling everyone that all of our organized gatherings of studying and practice is not put to a stop. And ever since then, all of my previously organized organizing groups or departments are all dissolved as well. I no longer have anyone to organize study groups. There is no longer any organization. In fact, there is no organization in Larungar. Anyhow, since the end of last year, we no longer have any organized gatherings or organizations or department, not even for one person or two people at all. I made disclaimers and post those disclaimers on my social media. In fact, I think between the year 2006 to 2019, within the 13 years, I think the majority of the classes are taught already, and for people who studied for that period of time, you should receive enough teachings, including both esoteric and exoteric teachings. Nowadays, however, the organized gatherings are rather not so convenient, especially for the country. So for those of you who want to or still continuing with such activity, you should understand that as people with lots of wisdom, I think you should understand my intention. In fact, I have no other hidden intentions other than the disclaimers I've made. I really think that people around me should understand what my genuine intention is. When the decision was made, I didn't make any other phone calls or tried other ways to keep this organization. I didn't even make any one phone call. I think this year is a very special time. I really hope that all of you could use this period of time to practice and study on your own, and this is probably the best way and the most safe way. The Buddhists or people from different religions or different social organizations, any kind of organizations, if it is not legally registered, then it would be rather difficult to continue. Therefore, I made such clear disclamation, such a clear disclaimer to all of you. People would I really hope that whomsoever read my disclaimer or listened to my class, you should understand I have no other hidden meanings under. I have no other hidden agendas at all. We never had any organizations, so to speak. We've never had had any organizations here, especially. Therefore, I am making this point more clearly to all of the Buddhists. We should study we should make sure that we study within a safe environment, and we should study under the country's regulations and so forth. This is probably the best way to go forth. I really hope that you could remember that. And and this is really a way to remind all of you. I've always said that everything happens because of conditions, and everything everything ends because of the ends of conditions as well. There are people who didn't like to study when there are groups, study groups, but they have no intention to study, no enthusiasm. But once the organized gatherings of study groups are dissolved, they wanted to study in groups so much. Back in 1985, when I just came to Larungar, there's no internet, no electricity, and I only studied with a few other people together. But now, because of the internet, we have such opportunity to study. Nowadays, I think in the future, in terms of the future, I've given some thoughts before, and I read into some of the biographies of great masters. There are great masters who turned the wheel of the Dharma for 40 years or so, and I've thought this is probably also a very good way for myself. If I can teach for another 4 or 5 years, I will also teach for 40 years. But I'm not sure if we'll have such conditions. Also, I really hope all of you to reconsider what home is. When Pengsu Rinpoche was still in Larungar, people would call Larungar their home. But now he's no longer here. I really hope that you can reconsider what home is. If you can uphold the teachings of lineage masters, and if you can look at where the lineage master's teaching begins as your home, that's fine. But also, you should consider where the condition, where all the coincidences are taking you. You should then follow all of those conditions. And if you do so, without having a grasp towards where your home is, you would be at ease. Otherwise, you would be stressed quite a bit. Therefore, my hope for you is to practice thoroughly on impermanence. As long as you're here, as long as you have the opportunity to study the Dharma, then you should try your best to strive to study. Because I know many people had lots of changes in their lives. The lessons that we've learned about how life is precious and how things are impermanent, I think this year you've learned quite a bit about that. That's my short notice before the actual class, my short notes and announcements. In order to liberate all sentient beings, let us generate the supreme bodhicitta. Now let us continue to study the text on transforming suffering and happiness into enlightenment. I think this particular teaching is very practical, especially when we are facing all kinds of extraordinary events nowadays. And it is probably quite applicable right now. When we study Madhyamika, Abhidharma, or Buddhist logic, all of them could build a really solid theoretical foundation for us. This is wonderful. I think to have solid foundations in the 5 treatises could definitely help us to dispel the deluded view in our mind stream. Because from the beginningless time, every one of us have developed the deluded view and deluded habits. On top of that, after we arrive to this world, we are tinted by our family and social environment as well as friends. We're very much influenced by them. And our habits could be tinted by them as well, which lead to direct influence on our right view and right action. At that time, if you studied rather quite in depth in terms of the theory in Buddhism, such as Madhyamika or Buddhist logic and so on, then whatever wrong view arises, you can then uphold the weapon of wisdom and cut through such wrong view. This is going to be rather easy. However, without such foundation, then every one of us with habits, with afflictions, with such strong impact of those, then you could feel that your view is the most right of all, and you would continue to follow your own view, your deluded view. If you have the right view, it would be easy for you to eradicate the wrong view. Therefore, I really encourage the young people to study with great effort on the topics of the 5 treatises, on the topics of the esoteric and exoteric teachings. Even if you cannot dedicate to one in particular. Of course, for some people who have very stable faith and they want to specialize in, for example, Madhyamika or Pure Land practice, that's fine as well. That's very good. However, I do think for a majority of people, since we have such wrong views, our environment and surroundings could create lots of influence on you. Therefore, it is quite important for you to have the investigative awareness, and to develop such awareness is quite useful. So to the young people, especially since you're still young, still have the clear thoughts, clear thinking, clear inference, and great analytical skills, and have lots of investigative capacity, then I think you can study mainly the 5 treatises. But for people who are already aged and maybe not so sharp anymore, and at that time, if you were to explore into the sutras and shastras, it might be a little difficult. Just as Pachu Rinpoche said, young practitioners and aged scholars are actually not so successful. There are lots of seniors nowadays who want to commit themselves into studying. I noticed that there are old people with only 1 or 2 teeth left in their mouths. They would talk and mumble, saying that I want to study Buddhist logic. I have lots of faith. I think in such a way, by the time they finish studying Buddhist logic, maybe they'll lose all their teeth. I remembered I met an old Lama who's around 60 years old, and at that time he only had one tooth left. When he studied Buddhist logic, since he only had one tooth left, and which contrasts quite a bit with his tongue, I think for such kind of person to study Buddhist logic, can she ever succeed in that? I think it's a little bit questionable. And there are young people who have great wisdom, who are very sharp, but what they only do is to chant Om Mani Padme Hum all the time. Of course, chanting mantra is encouraged. I remember that I encountered a 60-year-old Lama recently, and he said that he has some regret because when he was young and have a good memory, he didn't invest his time in studying the 5 treatises. He felt that it is the best for him to practice, to engage in actual practice. I think there are great practitioners who engaged in actual practice since a young age, but that is quite rare. For majority of people, because you had lots of influence from your environments and from different aspects, then therefore have lots of doubts and so on. For these kind of people, it is best to study and listen extensively. Now let's continue with the actual class today. Previously, we've already talked about to supplicate the 3 jewels, to supplicate the Dharma protectors as well as spirits. If your mind is not so strong, at the time you should supplicate and say that, may the 3 jewels supplicate, bless me so that my suffering and happiness, especially suffering, could be transformed into enlightenment. Whomsoever you supplicate to, Avalokiteshvara or Manjushri or 3 jewels, this is the way to supplicate, so that the suffering won't become an obstacle. The second way is when your mind is a little bit more stable, when you have more faith into yourself and confidence in yourself, at that time you should supplicate to the 3 jewels and worldly spirits, saying that whatever the unfortunate and the unwanted illness and obstacles, please let me have all of them. This is quite a grave challenge. The majority of practitioners don't dare to make such kind of supplication, just as previously stated, just like the hippies in the West, they have such kind of rebellious spirits. They rebel the social norms, they rebel the traditional values, and that's the actions they would take. I think it has some hidden meanings under. As Buddhists, even if we're really scared of obstacles and supplicate and pray all the time, please let my practice be without obstacles, no obstacles at all. Even if you pray in such a way, obstacles would still come, would still approach. Obstacles and pain, they would occur inevitably. Of course, without obstacles, it would be wonderful. But if it happens, then we should be prepared. We should have such determination to say that if it comes, it comes, and if I can't stop it, maybe I should just face it with great courage, and I should view such suffering and obstacle as happiness, because maybe with the condition of such obstacles, it would be helpful to my actual practice. So at that time, we should think from different perspectives. Just as maybe some things are not so wonderful to accept on the cursory outlook, but once you contemplate on it, it might be beneficial for you in its function. As previously stated, such as bitter medicine, to all of us, maybe it would be beneficial for our illness, and some food might not be very tasty, but it might be very nutritious. So we should accept the challenges, accept the obstacles as a challenge and as a beneficial factor to our practice. Yesterday I talked also about a durian when we smell durian, we may feel that it is quite disgusted. When I went to Singapore before, one of Dharma teacher who lived next door to me really enjoyed durian. Sometimes when people gift me durians, I would gift it to him right away. But I will lock up my door to avoid the smell of durian because it really stinks. I think sometimes it is exactly the same as suffering, because there are situations that we just can't transform suffering into enlightenment. Other than durian, also dislike stinky tofu. I tried a few times, but every time I get close to that smell, I feel like I want to throw up. I have no courage of trying stinky tofu. So if I cannot transform stinky tofu into enlightenment, maybe there are times that I can't transform suffering into enlightenment either. So I think they're all new challenges that we have to face. There are people, I think we just need to get accustomed to it and to get used to it. Maybe there are things that seems to be rather difficult at the beginning, but difficult to accept at the beginning, but it might be very beneficial to our mind. Just like moxie or surgery, it is definitely not enjoyable. However, since you understand taking up such procedures, such medical procedures, could be beneficial to your health, then you would bear such pain. Also, in terms of forbearance, it depends on our own value system. I noticed that young people nowadays really enjoy tattooing. They're peacocks and celebrities and athletes and different tattoos, different patterns. And when I watch them tattooing, it seems that they're enduring lots of pain at the time. However, in Thailand and Vietnam, I think they really like tattoos. They feel that it is a sign of spiritual strength. Also, they want to tattoo either tigers or elephants because those are symbols of heroism. So once they think of that kind of value they uphold in their mind, then they can endure the pain on their body. So this is really a challenge. This is a challenge of physical aspect of our body, and there are challenges of mind as well. At first, it may be difficult to enjoy, to accept it, but once you do, in fact, it could be very beneficial to you. So, the core of this teaching is for us to accept suffering, and once you accept it, you can develop an attitude of appreciation. Of course, at the beginning is a little bit difficult. As it is stated in Bodhisattva Charyavatara, it says that whatever we encounter, it should not disturb the mind of joyfulness, of joy. So I said the other day, we should have such kind of flexibility. Things could go this way or that way. It's all fine. Just like it is fine if it's raining. If it is fine, it is fine if it is not. If it is fine if I have money, because it is a way to accumulate more merit. If I don't have money, it's also fine because I can practice renunciation. And without money, in fact, it is quite burden-free as well. It is fine if I have health because I can practice more virtuous deeds. It is also fine if I'm not healthy because through such suffering, I can practice to sympathize with sentient beings' suffering as well. When we notice our mind is encountering some special changes or going through some special experience, then I think those are all opportunities for us to recognize the nature of samsara. Otherwise, if we were to live in a rather mundane life, maybe it doesn't really help us to develop any courage. We've lived in such a way for the past 10 or 20 years. People have food and have clothes to wear. There's no such appreciation towards life. But once you can go out to buy food, buy vegetables, buy rice even, and during the pandemic lockdown, everyone's in confinement and nobody could go grocery shopping, then at that time you can probably develop some more insights, something very new to you. And this kind of new insights could be very profound. It could be even very long-lasting and making impact for a long period of time. Maybe from a short term, looking at this type of lifestyle is rather quite cruel. However, through it, you can contemplate more deeply into your meaning of life, into what life is, and into what the nature of this world is. Of course, there are foolish ones who never really contemplate on any of those. Doesn't matter whatever they go through. But for people with a bit of capacity of deep thinking, of capacity of analyzing, once they go through any of those extraordinary events, they can in fact learn or gain the knowledge and wisdom that they couldn't have during mundane lifestyle. So in our life, sometimes things may seem difficult, but after, I think the difficulty, it is really up to you of how to use it. For example, during difficulty, if you collapse, if you give up, if you do so, that really means that you are only a foolish one. But during difficulties, if not only you didn't collapse or give up, you use this difficulty as a new opportunity. You see the side of opportunity in it. Then you can gain new insights or new knowledge from such difficulties. Therefore, whatever happens, we should have happiness. I think majority of time when we're happy, the weather's good, everything's good, then whatever happens is fine. But when we're going through turbulence in our mind, whatever unpleasant things happens, I think as mundane beings, it is very difficult to accept them. But suffering and happiness happens alternatively. This is just very normal. Therefore, we shouldn't give up so easily. We shouldn't be depressed and shouldn't feel that it's hopeless. Shouldn't have the feeling that there's no use of studying the Dharma. I still have so much affliction, so much deluded mind, and then just completely give up. This is in fact unreasonable. This kind of mentality could make your life really miserable and give up all of your effort that you've put in. So whenever you encounter any difficulties, you should use different perspective to look at it. On one hand, you're encountering that because of your previous karma, and on the other, whatever happens right now, it also depends on the uneven mind due to different causality. But you should still continue to work hard on it. This is quite necessary to contemplate with wisdom. I'm not sure any of you supplicated to the protectors to grant you difficulties. If you did, that's wonderful. If you felt that, well, it doesn't matter if I supplicate or not, this is just a theory, well, maybe some of you would think in such a way, then it wouldn't be beneficial anymore. Now let's continue. When you first begin this training, it is vital to distance yourself from ordinary social activities. Otherwise, caught up in everyday preoccupation and busyness, you will be influenced by all your misguided friends asking questions like, how can you bear to put up with so much suffering, so much humiliation? Besides, the endless worrying about enemies, relatives, and possessions will cloud your awareness and upset our minds beyond all our control, so that we inevitably go astray, sliding into bad habits. Then, on top of this, we will be swept away by all kinds of distracting objects and situations. This is quite important because this is it talks about the way of practicing this teaching. First of all, you should depart from anywhere that is very busy. Let it be a city or in a large crowd or a social environment or so on. We have to depart that kind of busy environment so that we can practice. As beginners, I think especially it is important to find a quiet place to practice, such as monasteries or centers or an arana, which is retreat centers and so on. This is wonderful. But if you really couldn't find a place like that, then in your city, you can stay there, but at least try to cut off the distractions and dedicate your time to contemplate and practice. For beginners, if you have such opportunities to do retreats and then finish your preliminary practices or meditation practices, this is quite necessary. Otherwise, if as Buddhist you only grasp onto theories such as the five treatises or tantras and sutras, whatever teachings you can talk a lot, but if you don't practice them even if you talk even if you can talk really well, it doesn't really help you because they're all theories. Therefore, doesn't matter how many days you've studied it, any tiny bit of the teaching, you should put them into practice. Just as simplest teaching such as the human body is difficult to gain and life is impermanence, all of those most basic in the tantras even, I think it is in fact very, very different for those who've actually contemplated it and those who had never. In terms of the depth and experience, they're completely different. Therefore, it is quite important for us to engage in actual practice. In terms of actual practice, I think in Chinese Buddhism, in Han Buddhism, there are people who would practice in solitary retreats, of course, in huts or caves, but there are also group practice. This is really wonderful. People would sit together, would meditate together, and then there would be a supervisor. holding a board that is called a meditation board, that is to spank you when you fall asleep. When meditators are blessed by the meditation board spanking, some of them would get enlightened right away at that moment. It happened before. In the history of Mahayana Buddhism, I think this kinds of different kinds of methods, different kinds of styles of practices are in fact quite important, are really wonderful. Therefore, I really encourage the Dharma teachers to lead meditation in groups. At the beginning, it could be a little bit difficult to get used to, but slowly you will understand and you will feel the blessings and you will feel how much insights you will gain from such. When I read into the historical biographies of great masters from Tang Dynasty to Sui Dynasty and so on, from all of those biographies, we can see the great number of masters and practitioners. In fact, they've put lots of efforts into actual practice. Therefore, if we do so as well, I'm sure genuine insights and realization will occur in you as well. So we should also engage ourselves in actual meditation practice. Maybe at the beginning we can practice all together in groups, and then we can practice in class as well to build such habit. This kind of meditation habit is in fact quite good to build when people are at young age. Kids from different places, different regions and countries. There are some young novice and young students. They would start practicing meditation. Some of them, they're too young and they would fall asleep halfway through. But I think it is still a very good habit to practice, to have, especially at a young age. I think this kind of habit would help a person for a whole life, would influence a person's life. Parents could use meditation as a method of education as well. They could educate the kids to be more disciplined and could use it as a timeout method. Anyhow, it is important to practice in a quiet place. Why is that? Because in a really preoccupied space, in a space that is really busy, and in such kind of place, then suffering would be rather difficult to handle. On top of that, your friends and your foes, there are so many different kinds of distractions. And because mundane being's mind is so fragile and so weak, therefore, even if you really want to practice, it is difficult to keep practicing and avoid the distractions. Therefore, it is quite important to find the appropriate environment to practice. Great masters, they've practiced in different environments. In fact, this kind of method is not only adapted by Buddhists, it is also adapted by great athletes as well, for the ones who've won gold or silver medals, for the ones who would first of all practice in extraordinary environments, and then eventually they would join the international or domestic contest. But before that, they have to put efforts in different environments first. Just as that, I think Buddhists really should get into the crowds as well. But if you get really busy all the time and distracted all the time, if you don't practice wholeheartedly, then you're still you still can't turn your suffering into practice. Therefore, it is important to go to a quiet place. On the other hand, if you do stay in a quiet center, a monastery or so, and study with certain Dharma kings or Khenpos or great monks, even if you say that you've stayed and studied for many years, but if you never really studied very deeply or practiced very deeply, then it doesn't help either. So the best way is really to study deeply when you have the opportunity. Sometimes, even if you haven't really spent lots of time studying, maybe you haven't really received that many teachings yet, but if you studied with lots of effort and your foundation is quite firm and sturdy, whatever you've studied, you would use that to in your daily life to familiarize. Then your mind can be transformed in a short period of time, and Buddha Dharma could really transform and change what you have, what you are. So at the beginning, when we are not used to be in crowds, when in such situation we should be in quiet places, and in that way it will be helpful to you. But in the solitude of retreat environment, since none of those are present, your awareness is very lucid and clear, so it's easy to make mind do whatever you want it to do. Especially when you go to places such as the sacred places that's been blessed by the great masters. Once you're there, then your mind could naturally be calmed down. Just as it is stated in the 37 stanzas of Bodhisattva, it says that because departing the vicious environment, the afflictions are eliminated, and without distraction, therefore virtue would naturally increase. Because mind is abiding on the Dharma to develop certainty, a certain view, therefore one should abide in quiet place. That is the practice of Bodhisattva. So once we are at a quiet place, our mind is naturally becoming more capable. Just as great masters and the tradition that's passed down from great masters of Nyingmapa, they would encourage their students to practice preliminary teachings first and then practice shamatha for 4 to 5 years. Once their mind are basically more tamed, at that time their mind has more capacity, then the masters would give the disciples teachings of Trekchö and Togyo. But nowadays, it is different. There are so-called masters. They would give teachings right away without even preliminary practices or empowerment. And at the beginning, maybe the disciple would feel rather quite happy about it, directly looking at the front and cut through all afflictions. It is wonderful to think about. And the teacher may feel very proud of himself as well, feeling that, look at me, I have the power to give the teaching of Mahāti. I am so wonderful. In such a self-delusional way, both of them finish the actual practice. And because of the preliminary practices are not solid, maybe after a period of time, the disciple would start having afflictions and start having different feelings of his Vajra master. Then there is such a possibility of this kind of ending as well. Therefore, it is the best to practice the preliminary practices. Once it is very solid, then you can practice further. Otherwise, it is just like building on top of ice. It may seem to be beautiful, but it is not sturdy at all. It is for the very reason that when practitioners of Chö training in trampling right on top of suffering, It is quite a high practice, the chot practice, the cutting through practice. I think many people would know. And at the beginning, it is very difficult to practice in crowds. So what they do is at the beginning, they would put off doing the practice using the harm caused by human beings and amidst distraction. But instead, make a point of working with apparitions of gods and demons in cemeteries and other desolate, powerful places. So maybe because the human crowds would be really harmful, it is hard to practice chot. Therefore, it is important to go to the charnel ground first when there are evil spirits and disturbing spirits. That might be better. So for the great practitioners who practice chot or the cutting through, they would first go to quiet places such as the 8 great charnel grounds, just like great masters such as Padmasambhava and so on. All of the Vajradaras, they would first depart from the human crowds, and once they finish practicing the forbidden practices, once they can subdue the ghosts and demons, then they will come back to the human crowds. Because the human beings also have the similar afflictions, such as greed to the different gender and anger towards the same gender and all different kinds of afflictions and so on. About charnel ground, I really suggest our practitioners do not go to charnel ground for no reason, especially for those of you who don't have great practice or high level of realization. Then it could be easily to be contaminated in the charnel ground. I think if you do not have the level of realization of protecting yourself, but only want to visit charnel ground with a great curiosity or a feeling of or blind kind of curiosity, thinking that since Padmasambhava had been to the charnel ground, therefore I had to as well. Well, maybe at the end of your first visit to charnel ground, you might get sick. It is very possible. So it is really wonderful. It is really recommended to practice with great foundation first, including the charnel ground in Larungar. I think many people view it as a tourism spot. This is quite wrong. I once heard that there are tourists who would hold cameras and wait in line to see the corpse for the sky burial. And then once the corpse has arrived, the tourists would clap. In fact, this is quite disrespectful. Sky burial or any kinds of funeral place, in fact, is a place of lots of sorrow. People would feel lots of sadness at funeral place. I myself sent my parents to sky burial after they passed away, and every time I'm at the charnel ground, my emotion and my mind is in fact quite sad. At that time, if people are taking pictures or clap, it is very disrespectful. It's important to respect culture. It is important to respect the deceased. Therefore, usually the Tibetans don't want to open up sky burial sites. There's nothing to take pictures of, really, when we think about it. Even the most beautiful and the most handsome ones would become really scary once they die. Milarepa also once said that the so-called corpse are really the body that we have now. Therefore, corpse are nothing curious, nothing rare. So for lots of tourists who think that charnel ground of Larongar is very famous, therefore I have to go and take a picture, it is not necessary. I think building architectures around charnel ground is a culture, is a way of showing respect to the deceased. It's a way of respecting the culture. But you should not view it as a tourist spot. In such a way, if you see it as a tourist spot, then you're really being very disrespectful to life, disrespectful to culture and traditions. There's no way that you can take pictures in funeral homes saying that, oh, this corpse is really beautifully displayed. You shouldn't do that. You won't do that. And if you do that, their family member, the family member of the deceased ones probably won't be very happy. Because of the pandemic, now charnel ground is also under lockdown. I think this is really good. When I traveled back from Luhor, everything on the road, there were roadblocks and so on. It is very difficult to enter into this area. I think this is quite good because we don't have many people. But from a long-term perspective, if we were to open up charnel ground as a tourist spot, I myself do not agree to it. I don't know how you would think, but this is really my personal view on it. Anyhow, to sum up, not only so that your mind will not be affected by misfortune and suffering, but also to be able to draw happiness and peace of mind out of these things themselves. What we need to do is this. Do not see inner problems like illness or outer troubles like rival spirits or scandalous gossip as something undesirable and unpleasant, but instead simply get used to seeing them as something pleasing and delightful. This paragraph is a sum up from all the previous part where it talks about when suffering occurs, not only it shouldn't create any harm to you, it should generate a sense of delight and pleasure for you. We should study from that. And in order to do that, we should learn to eliminate the inner illness, or we should eliminate the kind of repulsion towards the inner illness or outer spirits. This is quite important to remember that whatever happens, we should generate a mind of delight. If we want to transform it into enlightenment, let it be inner or outer. Obstacles, we used to feel they are just they're just things that we don't like, we don't want, but now not only we shouldn't push them away, when they do occur in our life, we should think, wow, there's the opportunity. For example, when you get ill, you should think, this is my opportunity to study Dharma. When there's an enemy, then you should think, oh, I'm really happy that I have an opportunity. Things like such. I think when we live in a mundane life that nothing happens, we don't really have any insights. But whenever there is some strong stimulus, then it's very easy for us to have insights, and genuine insights are very difficult to gain. So at the time, you should feel. So normally, when nothing happens, you feel that you're a great practitioner. But once any little thing happens, even a few words could really hurt and stab your heart. But when your practice got more deepened and more stabilized, you should be able to have the strength to just rush over there and directly penetrate the affliction and suffering and transform it into enlightenment. If you don't have practice to start with, if you don't have security, then whatever little thing that other people said could create great harm. Just as it is stated in psychology, there are two types of mindset. One is abundant and the other one is scarcity. For people with a sense of abundant mindset, just as stated in Uttara Tantra Shastra, where it says that we have Buddha nature, and since you have Buddha nature, even if other people says the most offensive things to you, you wouldn't care, since you have the most precious thing, that is Buddha nature. However other people would slander you, you would feel it's okay. It's nothing at all compared to Buddha nature, the inner richness. And then if you have an inadequate mindset and you have a scarcity mindset, have no confidence whatsoever to begin with, and then whatever little thing other people could probably mention without even the intention to say it to you, you would feel that it is targeted to you and get lots of harm. So for normal or mundane practitioners, they would feel that it is my opportunity to practice the Dharma when everything is prepared and everything's ready. But for good practitioners, even if nothing's working out, they would feel that this is my opportunity to practice the Dharma. There is a great difference between the two types of mindset. For the mundane practitioners, if they receive their salary, if their house is no longer leaking, if everything's good, if weather's good, all the conditions are already there, they feel that this is the best time to practice meditation, and they will do that. But if you have better practice, if you're more stable, then you should recognize that even if today nothing goes well, everything is so unfortunate, nothing works out, and it's suffering on suffering, and that's the time to practice. This is a great practitioner. I think in Buddhism there are so many teachings that is very uncommon and unfound in the worldly teachings. Just as I said the other day, that in the West, people would go and seek for help from psychiatrists or psychologists right away through consultation. But in fact, all those psychiatrists and psychologists, they have lots of suffering themselves as well, without security themselves as well. It is really blind leading blind. All they can do is to give theoretical teachings. But of course, maybe I am not so professional in terms of psychology, but I've also consulted some of those Western psychologists. In terms of their tradition, I think there is some difference. For example, the lineage master of Western psychology, that is their Samadabhadra, the Samadabhadra of Western psychology, are Freud or Jung and Adler, all of whom developed their theory less than 100 years ago. And before that, psychology was really a blank to start with. There's really no genuine lineage to start with. For example, Adler has more emphasis on the more positive part. that is helpful for people's anxiety and depression, and could lead them to achieve people's goal. And from that aspect, I think Adler's theory is very helpful, and this kind of guidance is very helpful. From a different aspect, however, I think because Adler went through a rather difficult childhood, he was quite he was not happy when he was young, and throughout his whole experience we can see that he was not confident. He was very self-conscious, and many difficult situations happened to him, and because of lack of confidence, he then later on tried very much to transcend that, to transform it, and then eventually did transform it in his own sense. So he presented his discovery to people, and lots of people felt it was very good and helpful. But that kind of help and that kind of presentation and discovery compared to the realization of Buddhism and Enlightenment, I think there is still a big gap. Adler and Jung are considered as they started off as students of Freud. At first, Freud think highly of Jung because he felt that Jung's understanding and studying of theology, as well as of religion and analysis of dreams, has his own characteristics. Especially Freud has such specialization. His book, The Analysis of Dreams, is in fact quite famous. So he talks about the dreams. But I think the dream, in terms of talking about the dreams, some of them is partially influenced by our habit, part is our life experience, and part of it is because of our daily activities. And Freud thinks that people's psychology or action is mainly driven by sex, and he thinks that is the main intention. And through his teaching, he felt that this is really the driving force behind human action and human psychology. But Jung is more influenced by religion, and he doesn't agree with him. Therefore, they had some differences. There's a book, it's called Jung and Tibetan Buddhism, where Jung said that the Tibetan Book of the Dead had influenced him a lot. He said that this book has been with me all the time, and lots of my discovery and my theory is based on the teaching of this book. But when we look at Jung and his theory, we can see that his view is different than Freud, but his view is still rather superficial, or at least on the superficial level. I think he only got more influence from that book. Anyhow, because of the difference of the ideas of Jung and Freud, I think they had very different ideas. Later on, I think Freud
解析也好，很多的话呢，他觉得是以前的一种习气，就是导致到这个现在啊，就许许多多的这些事情呢，
Freud thinks that dream is mainly based on the previous habits or subconscious that happened previously. Let it be inside their habitual patterns or so on. But Adler thinks that it is more related to the future. I think it also is because of his childhood experience. Although Freud, at the end of his later of his years, though two of his disciple or colleagues didn't continue with his tradition, they all developed their own thinking, but he also contributed quite a bit to the Western psychology. From certain aspects, we can see that their thinking is not completely based on their enlightenment, their realization, their actual practice, their understanding of the nature of mind. In fact, their study is based on the analysis of the mad people or going through the analysis of their own experience. There's a saying, I think is quite witty. It says that everyone in this world has a psychological problem, except it is only that everyone has different psychological problems. I think this kind of witty saying is very similar to Buddhism's view of that people have all kinds of afflictions. All kinds of afflictions. Only that through psychology they didn't really talk about it on that level. Therefore, as Buddhists, either from the angle of psychology or the angle of Buddhism, we should stand at a point that is rather impartial, and we should try to experience and try to practice, put things into practice so that you understand what Buddhism is teaching. Let it be distraction or dualistic thoughts. All different things could bring you different insights through such practice. In the Shrangama Samadhi Sutra, it says that first of all, you should develop awareness and not enter into samsara. But without awareness, you are ignorant with confusion. That can only lead to hell realm, to be born in hell realm. That is the necessity of it.
它既然是合理性，就是这一句话是要可能盖一下
，to accomplish
要到这样的境界的话，就是可能这句话盖的就是
we need to stop looking at harmful circumstances as problems and make every effort to view them as beneficial.
要到这样的境界的话，那就需要智者就是将那些损害就是思维过患的方面，然后需要尽最大的努力呢，就是把他们就是视为这个功德。
If we want to attain this kind of realization, seeing illness and so on, as an object of happiness rather than unwanted object. I think this is quite important. These kinds of obstacles should be viewed as merits. Let it be illness, slandering criticism, or harmful actions from others. All of those should be viewed as benefits rather than harmful actions. After all, whether a thing is pleasant or unpleasant comes down to how it is perceived by the mind. In fact, like it or not, you prefer it or not, it is really based on how your mind grasps, how your mind created such kind of fixation. And then there's an example. Take an example, someone who continually dwells on futility of ordinary mundane preoccupations will only get more and more fed up as their wealth or circle increase. There are people who really don't want to be in crowds, circles of people, don't like wealth or fame. Then they would see busy circumstances or ordinary mundane preoccupations as obstacles. They would feel that, I really don't want fame, I really don't want too much money. What should I do about all these burdens? On the other hand, someone who sees worldly affairs as meaningful and beneficial will seek, and even pray to have such affairs to increase their power and influence. Such as lots of the leaders in our world, they want to gain more fame and more money. They would admire so-and-so who earned more money. So-and-so became the new deputy chief, deputy director. So-and-so started driving luxurious cars. But those kinds of things are in fact meaningless to good practitioners, good renunciants. So for the same kind of situation, such as fame, luxurious cars and house and so on, people would view it very differently. For people with such fixation on them, they would really enjoy it. They would want more. They wish that they have more crowds of people, circle of people to follow them. But for renunciates, for the same circumstances, they would view them as harmful. Similarly, once you get sick, good practitioners would think that I can transform it into practice. That's wonderful. But for people who are weak-minded, they would think that, am I going to die? So it really depends on how people would view the same situation. Just as a Lama used to told me that I don't want to go to hospital because those hospitals are terrible. If they told me that I am on late-stage cancer, what should I do? I can't do that. So for the same circumstances, people view it very differently. Maybe we would stop it here. For people who view preoccupation as beneficial, they would view it as beneficial. They would view it as beneficial and wanted. So I'll give you the oral transmission now.
niense te tak kyonji shuksu tawa gagchang yondun su tawa mbapa tamchi ki flab go de yer te gong yegong yimman no lun zinzir la tikbi shir de khwernan dunzi nyingmu ki shukni mangda sambar nam kordang longshu su chizim jeba te zamda sirnang chejang dunzi la panyong dar tawa nam ngatang jeba la yermun tsinchidu sheba zhino sonam daye tamche zirba tomna nibe jana pashe jang tirga nanji rarnon cheba chubum zolen joa